Welcome back to Gold Rush, the Rustic Crackle technique. Part 2, Painting the Beads. Here are the materials you will need for Part 2. If you've already done some painting or some mixed media art, you may have a lot of these on hand already. Now it's time to paint these beads, and this is where the magic happens. This is where they really start to turn into pieces of art and stones. It's my favorite part. It's really fun. We're going to use various paints. We're going to layer them and sand to achieve a really natural look. Our first layer of color is going to be done with alcohol inks. I like them for a couple reasons. First, because they dry quickly and I'm very impatient. And when we're putting a lot of layers of color on, it's nice to have things that dry quickly and speed the process up. I also like that they have a sort of translucent nature. You can put them on real thin like watercolors or put them on brighter in other areas. So they're very versatile like that. It's my favorite go-to for a base coat of paint and color. This is how I set up my workspace. I usually have some sort of palette that I put my colors in, my rubbing alcohol to dilute, and paper towels, paper plates. Sometimes I put down mat board. The alcohol inks are really intense and they do stain, so whatever you're working on, you want to be okay with it being something that can take the color and might not come off. Using alcohol inks is very much like using watercolors, except instead of using water to dilute and rinse, you're using rubbing alcohol. So if you've used watercolors before, this should feel pretty natural to you. I think most of us have dabbled. When painting your bead, first I like to get a little alcohol on my brush, dip it in the color, and then dip it on the paper towel just to see where that color intensity is. I like to start dark and paint some areas dark. And then I'll dip my brush back into the alcohol with no color, dip it on the paper towel, and then go back to that dark spot on the bead and spread it around. This is going to vary the intensity of the color. You want to have all the shades of this color on your bead. So you went from very dark to very light, and you can even leave white spaces. Varying the color intensity, fading it around your bead is going to give it a more natural, worn look. As you paint, the rinse alcohol is going to change colors. You can see in the first picture that it's a really bright pink, and in the second color, as I've gone back to using some blues, it's becoming more of a muddy color. This shouldn't affect your colors too much, and if it does start to affect your colors, you just change out your rubbing alcohol for clean rubbing alcohol. When you want to change colors, again, you just rinse your brush in the rubbing alcohol, and then I usually rub it on my paper towel until it's dry. Even if you still have a little bit of color coming off your brush, that's fine. Once it's dry and you dip it in a new color of alcohol, that new color is what's going to go on your bead. So you can see here that I went from having pink on my brush to blue, and it's blue on the bead, even though the rinse water is muddy and even though I had done other colors before it. So it really is, you got to play around with it, but it really stays pretty true to itself. I also want to make a very important note here that you cannot leave brushes set in the rubbing alcohol. It will eat away at some brushes, and I've dissolved many a brush forgetting this. So you want to train yourself early on to rinse your brush, dry it off, and then leave it set out. Unlike acrylic paint, it's not going to dry in your brush and ruin your brush. It's such a fine color. It's such a thin medium. It's not going to ruin your brush. I do like to designate certain brushes for alcohol inks though, because they do stain. Here I'm painting my accent bead and I'm just showing you how you want to try to paint around the gold. Once again, if you get color on your gold, you just want to immediately wipe it off with a paper towel. It can stain the gold color, which is fine if you want to do that. It just adds a little shimmer under the color. But if you really want that gold vein, that crackle that we're going for, then you want to try to kind of paint around it or wipe it off right away before it dries. I just want to take a minute to talk about cleaning up alcohol inks. They can be very messy. They also will stain your hands. So if you have a job where you can't have ink stained hands, I would recommend wearing latex gloves. Um, Otherwise, if you're like me and you really like to work with your hands, you can scrub it off. You can scrub with soap and water, a scrubby, a nail brush, and then if there's still some real thick gunk on your hands, you can use a little rubbing alcohol to dissolve it. You can also use the Ranger Adirondack alcohol blending solution to help remove it from your hands. And I have also found, and I love this, this works the best. It's made by Ranger, it's called a craft scrubby, and it's more like a pumice stone. It's not too hard on your hands, and it really, really helps to get the alcohol inks off. However, I always have alcohol inks in the corners of my fingernails for a couple days. So again, if you can't have ink stained hands, I would recommend gloves. It's really hard to touch the beads and move the beads without getting any on your fingers at all. So this was just a little note for those of you who need to keep your hands a little on the cleaner side. Now we're going to use our sanding pads again. Once again, use your dust mask anytime you're dry sanding. Even if you're not creating a lot of dust, you always want to use a dust mask to protect your lungs. When your ink is dry, you want to take your sanding pad and you want to sand the high spots, the edges, and if you didn't leave white or you didn't leave any light areas on your bead, you can actually go in and sand away that color to reveal white or to make a more pale pastel area. This is a great time to go back and do that. If you over sand, you can always go back and put more color back on. But what we're doing here when we're sanding and we're hitting the high spots, you're giving it that natural look of a tumbled stone. Stones, if you have something that's colored and it's tumbling around, it's going to fade in those tall high spots that hit places. So it's really just another step in giving this a very natural look. The next part we're going to do is the antique layer. This is where we're going to start using acrylic paint. It's going to give the bead an antique appearance. I prefer using Folk Arts Asphaltum, which is a yellow brown. It is a wonderful color. It has, again, like a translucent quality to it, and it gives the piece a sepia tone. It really makes it look old-fashioned. Forewarning, it's going to change the color of your inks, but this is not a bad thing. This process really it encourages you to embrace surprises because you never really know how it's going to look at the end until you're there. But it is fun, and this is really a great process. Antiquing things, this is a step that I think a lot of people overlook, and it just brings your beads to life and it just gives them a depth that you can't get without it. For acrylic paints, you're going to use water again as a rinse. Get a nice big flat brush. I like a big flat brush, it really coats quickly. And you want to make sure that your acrylic paint is a medium sort of consistency. You don't want it too watery, but you don't want it too thick. You want it a consistency so that when you paint it on your bead, it's going to get in all those little cracks and crevices easily without being so watery that it runs out. So, once you have your paint to the right consistency, slather it all over your bead. You want to get in all those nooks and crannies, both sides. Next, you want to take a paper towel and immediately wipe the paint off. You don't want to allow it any drying time. You want to get that paint off of there. You can see in the second picture where the brown is in the recesses. And you can also see that it's no longer that bright blue turquoise. It has given it a green hue because this is a yellow brown. So it's always going to change your colors a little bit. Here's a little example of a before and after. So this is what the colors look like before, and then what the colors look like after this sepia tone, this yellow brown. It's dramatic. It's really dramatic. You don't have to use the asphaltum if you don't want to. Some people love how it changes the color and how it gives you that sepia tone, and some don't. If you use more of a straight up brown, like a burnt umber, or even black or a mixture of burnt umber and black, it's not going to change your color as dramatically. I will sometimes use a mixture of these two so that I get a more crisp antiquing in the recesses and it doesn't affect that underlying color. Here's another piece in that pink purple color tone, and instead of using the asphaltum, I'm covering it once again with the acrylic paint. It's a mixture of black and burnt umber. I'm wiping away the color again, and now you can see the difference. This one is a little more black heavy, and it is a totally different look. So what's really fun about this is that you can use all different mixtures of browns and blacks or even other colors. And when you paint them on and wipe them away, they get stuck in those crevices and they really make all your textures pop and stand out. And you can really change the entire feel of your bead depending on what colors you use. Now side by side you can see the beads were both the same colors to start with, and on the left side we have the black brown that we used, and on the right side we have that asphaltum. So two completely different colors. Now once again, when your paint dries, we are going to sand the high spots. Same as before, change it up, sand different areas. Every time that we paint a layer of color on, we want to sand a little off. And again, it just gives it that natural look. Also, if you put a lot of asphaltum on, if you couldn't get all the color off, you can once again bring white spots back to your piece so it's not all brown and dingy looking. Here's another comparison of these side by side. Up to this point, all these techniques I'm showing you can be used one or the other or all together like we're doing them. You can stop with the bright colors and you don't have to antique. You can not do color and just do the brown and white and give it a real bone look. So you can really have fun playing with these techniques up to this point and really making these pieces your own. I really encourage you to try these a million different ways, which is another reason I like for you guys to make a lot of bead samples in the beginning. Then you can pick your favorites for your finished piece. Next is the crackle layer. I love this layer. I use DecoArt One Step Crackle. I've tried a lot of crackles and this is the only one that really has the effect that I like for polymer. It's not flaky, and it gives you a fairly consistent crackle every time. So since it's water soluble, you're going to once again need rinse water. I use a clean palette or paper plate and I put some out on my plate. The key to this one-step crackle is the thicker you put it on, the bigger the cracks are going to be. And I am not kidding. Like it will always crack, but sometimes they're so fine you can barely see it. You have to look really close if you put it too thin of a layer on. So that you really want to glob it on. Now I like to vary the thickness because again, it's nice to have some parts with big cracks and some parts with little cracks. Once again, we're going for that natural, that uneven nature of things. So glob it on in some spots and you don't even have to paint it. You just kind of push it onto there. Just scrape your brush on the edge of the bead and just move it around. And then other spots you can paint it on a little thin. When your crackle is dry, it's going to be really shiny and the cracks are going to be clear. So they're not going to be real easy to see with the naked eye, but if you look really close, you can see in the second picture a little better the size of the cracks. You got to kind of hold it in the light at the right angle to see them. Here's a great picture showing a thinner coat that gives you real fine cracks, the kind that you get in old china. Here's an example of where I put it on thicker and you got bigger cracks. So how do we get these cracks to stand out? We're going to do another antique layer. For this antique layer, I use a darker acrylic paint. Again, I go with a burnt umber and black mix. It's heavy on the burnt umber, but I add a little black in because the burnt umber can be kind of pale in these cracks. So if you really want them to stand out, I'd put a little black in that, or you can use a different brown. Again, you want to play around and see what you like. But we're going to do it the same way we did the other. You're going to paint it all over your bead. You want to brush in all directions to make sure it sinks into all the cracks as well. Then you're going to wipe it off with a clean paper towel. If you don't get all of it off in the first wipe, take a clean section of paper towel and just keep wiping. I like to wipe it until I can almost like polish it smooth, and you'll see that shine start to shine up again, and then you can see how much better we can see those cracks because the dark paint is left in the recesses. Here's another example just showing a different color base, just so you can see how this looks on all different colors, all different crackle sizes. And here it is once again with the pink base, just showing you what it looks like before, during, after. Next, we need to seal the beads. We do not sand after the crackle layer. The crackle layer is the last thing. We do that, we antique it, we seal it. So sanding is only done on those base coats. Now you have this nice crackle. It's nice and shiny. Your cracks are standing out, and we need to seal them for longevity. I prefer using Varathane. It has to be water-based so that it doesn't react with the polymer. And then if you like a matte finish, I like the golden polymer varnish with UVLS. That is the best matte I've found. It's the truest matte I've found, and it does not get tacky and sticky. So it is a wonderful finish, and that's the one I'm going to use on these beads. Before you start doing your sealer, you want to give your beads a couple hours at least to dry. I like that acrylic in the cracks to really set up, and I will often leave them dry overnight, but even a couple to a few hours is fine. When you're applying a sealer, thin coats with ample dry time is key. Whether you're using the Varathane or the golden, you want to do at least 2 to 3 coats, and you want to read the package and see how long you need to leave them dry in between, and you want to do that. That is going to create the hardest, most durable finish for your beads. Now there's different finishes for the Varathane. So there's semi-gloss, there's satin. I don't think there's a matte in the Varathane, not that I've been able to get, but each one is going to give you a different reflective surface when you're done. The semi-gloss gives you almost a ceramic like glaze. I think it's the closest to ceramic, that shiny finish, almost like a raku crackle. So if that's the look that I'm going for in a project, then I will go to semi-gloss. Using matte gives you a very flat finish, like an unpolished stone. It's really my favorite. It's my go-to. A lot of my work, I want it to look like stone. I want it to look natural. So it's absolutely my favorite, and it will really matte down that shininess that you have from the crackle. Thank you for watching part 2 of our class. Be sure to watch part 3 and learn how to take these unique beads that you just made and wire them up into one-of-a-kind necklaces.